So please welcome Douglas Sotak as the CRVO tells the story of the Sorcerer's Apprentice by Paul Dukas.
Our next story in music is a very old story about a sorcerer and his apprentice. Now, a sorcerer is a man who can do great feats of magic, and an apprentice is his helper, who is trying to learn magic and someday become a sorcerer himself. The particular apprentice in our story was a young and eager lad, too eager, in fact, for instead of tending to his apprentice duties, he was more interested in becoming a sorcerer right away. And that's how our story begins. One day, the sorcerer was practicing his magic. He put on his magic hat, and all of a sudden, he made a huge, beautiful butterfly appear out of nowhere. And then he made it disappear all at once. This took a lot of energy, and the sorcerer grew tired. So he took off his magic hat and set it on the table. He instructed the apprentice to take 2 buckets and fill his great well with water from the spring, while he went to his study for a nap. Now, filling the great well with water was a lot of work for the apprentice, for the spring was up many steps, and it would require a great many trips carrying the heavy buckets back and forth. So the apprentice had an idea. He put on the sorcerer's magic hat and waved his arms at a broom that was standing in the corner. And before you know it, the broom began to glow magically. And then the broom started to come to life. It walked right up and stood at attention in front of the apprentice. First, one arm appeared out of its side, then another arm. And then it picked up the 2 buckets and started to move. The broom followed the apprentice wherever he went, carrying the heavy buckets filled with water. It followed the apprentice right up the steps and dipped one of the buckets into the spring. And then it dipped the second bucket into the spring and filled them both to the top. Then the broom carrying the 2 full buckets of water followed the apprentice down the steps all the way to the great well. When it got to the well, the broom dumped the water out of the buckets and into the well. Then the broom followed the apprentice back up the steps to the spring again to get more water. Now the apprentice thought, this was a pretty good idea. The broom knew what to do, so he decided to take a rest himself, letting the broom do all the work of filling the well. Unfortunately, the apprentice fell asleep while the broom continued to go back and forth from the spring to the well, carrying bucketful after bucketful of water. And as the apprentice slept, he began dreaming about standing on top of a very high rock, out in the middle of the ocean, like a great sorcerer, controlling the waves splashing all about him. But suddenly, the little apprentice woke up. There was water all around him, and it wasn't a dream at all. All the time he had been asleep, the broom had been carrying water from the spring to the well, and the well had overflowed, and there was water all over the floor, and the room was rapidly filling up. The apprentice ran up to the spring to stop the broom from bringing any more water. But when he tried to stop it, the broom walked right over him, bringing more and more water to the well. Finally, in desperation, the apprentice grabbed a huge axe and brought it crashing down on the broom. Again, and again, and again, and again. Until there was nothing left of the broom but a bunch of little pieces of wood lying on the floor. Then the apprentice trudged back to the well to try to clean up the mess before the sorcerer woke up. But while his back was turned, a very strange thing happened. Each of the little chopped up pieces of wood began to come to life. They stood upright and sprouted little hands out of their sides, then grew into full-size brooms. In a few minutes, there were 100 of them, and each one had 2 buckets filled with water. They started to march down the steps to the well. When the apprentice saw them coming, he was terribly frightened, and he rushed to try to stop them. But the brooms kept coming and coming. They walked right over the apprentice, trampling him with the buckets of water. He tried everything he could to stop them, but they brought more and more and more water until the room was like a whirlpool of water, swirling around and around, pouring over the apprentice's head. The brooms kept marching with more buckets, even though the water had almost reached the ceiling by now. The apprentice was swimming for his life, but he could no longer stay afloat. He was about to drown. Suddenly, the sorcerer appeared. And when he saw the water, he was very angry. The sorcerer raised his hands in the air, and the water began to disappear. He raised them again, and more water disappeared. Once more, he raised his hands again and again and again, until the water was all gone. Then he walked over to the frightened apprentice. He snatched the magic hat off his head and wrung it out. Then he made all the brooms become one broom, and he set it back in the corner. And then he handed the apprentice the 2 buckets, and he sent him back to work. And then he kicked him right square in the pants.